This case is positioned in the 1850s to 1880s period of the exhibition, which deals with the idea of gold building the growth of Melbourne. At the beginning of this period, Melbourne's population was only 23,000, and yet by the end, 1880, it had exploded to over 850,000 people. Within the passage of only a few months in 1854, Melburnians saw the foundation of their public library, the University of Melbourne, the Age newspaper, and the National Museum of Victoria, and that's where this case comes into the Melbourne Story. Histories of the museum from this period invariably centre around the director at the time, Sir Frederick McCoy. McCoy had the charm, tenacity and gall to generally get what he wanted, but his reputation for conflict was legendary. So whilst I love those stories about the scientific stashes and McCoy's run-ins with the government over money, what I wanted to portray here in the case was the sense of wonder for natural history that people in the colony had at the time. Many of the scientific specimens in this case also reveal fascinating stories about colonial life. Perhaps my favourite suite of objects from this case are the scientific illustrations that you can see at the back here. These illustrations form part of a much larger collection called the Prodromus Collection of some 1,000 illustrations. They were commissioned from 1857 to 1897 by Frederick McCoy for the museum's first publication, the Prodromus. The Prodromus was a vast undertaking which drew on the work of various artists, lithographers, and invariably a lot of the government's money. The most prolific of these artists was Arthur Bartholomew, who was also Frederick McCoy's attendant. Bartholomew's illustrations reveal his fastidious nature in the lab and his working conditions. In the laboratory, he would tend all the live specimens and illustrate them in the different stages of their life. And this methodology changed little over 40 years. So McCoy would bring these live specimens into the laboratory to Bartholomew, and he would put them into small cases known as Wardian cases. He would then issue each with an individual number, which you can note on the illustration here, the place of location and the date. Bartholomew would then carefully file the illustration in a plan drawer and go back to attending the ever-growing collection of live specimens. This butterfly illustration is an Australian painted lady, and it was collected on the grounds at Melbourne University. And as it came into Bartholomew's care, it was the caterpillar that you can see in the centre of the illustration. On the 12th of December 1860, Bartholomew noted that the larva had pupated. He then extracted the illustration and depicted the chrysalis hanging from the host plant. Bartholomew then had to wait until Christmas Day before the adult butterfly emerged. The illustration then sat in the collection for another 20 years before he would transfer it onto a lithographic stone to be published as plate 198 in the Prodromus. In 1859, to complete his study of seals, Frederick McCoy purchased a seal skull from Ludwig Becker, a naturalist and illustrator in Melbourne at the time. But again, in the archive, we find an intriguing story behind this relatively simple transaction in the form of the letter from Ludwig Becker offering it to Frederick McCoy for sale. The letter reveals Becker's excitement at coming across this seal on Punt Road in the summer heat of 1859. Young female seal caught alive vis-a-vis Wilhelmie's residence, Punt Road, not far from Gardiner's Creek Road, south. Sitting under a tree in the morning sun yesterday week. It was lively and galloped alongside Wilhelmie, who was leading it home with a rope. It lived 3 hours after we caught it, but if you will buy it, I think it will be the means of completing your observations on seals.